if a white guy doesn't get a job because the government says, hey, we're focused on, we want to hire women and gay people and dark-skinned people and Aboriginals, and that's our priority. That's who we're going to hire. Well, do you really think there's not going to be some kind of a backlash? And so now you do get some groups. I hear about it. I'm not familiar with it, but you get this kind of like, like white Canadians, European Canadians have to look after themselves. I can't stand that sentiment, but I can see where it's coming from. When you push this garbage like this Musqueam agreement, the part of the consequence is you're going to get this white nationalism is going to arise. And I disagree with the white nationalism, but I'm saying I can see how this kind of stuff pushes us towards that conflict.
John Carpay, back again. How you doing, my friend?
Good to be with you. I'm doing well. I don't think Canada's doing well, but personally, I'm fine.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm in the same place right now. It's hard to make sense of the world that we're in, and especially the country that we're in, because we are in a very precarious place right now where we are caught between dueling superpowers. We pledge allegiance to one and then an allegiance to the other. We have a strategic partnership and a historic alliance, and we're just right here in the middle, and everything just seems to keep falling apart, and the wheels are just continuously falling off. So the last time we spoke, we talked about bills C2, C8, and C9 and the growing surveillance state in Canada. The JCCF, you guys recently released a big press package talking about the erosion of civil liberties in Canada, the growth of the surveillance state, and where Canada is going. But I want to start in a different place today, John, because something incredible happened over the last few weeks. It appears that the Musquem Band in British Columbia have been deemed as the rightful owners of much of the lower mainland, which includes the metropolitan Vancouver area. Now, for people on the outside looking at this is just more Canadian ridiculousness, right? We're at a point where we've humiliated and self-immolated to a degree where the rest of the world just reads whatever's happening in Canada, if it penetrates their bubble, and just laughs at us because we've taken DEI and what people would refer to as woke, but what is actually communism, to like a whole new level. Cultural Marxism, I should say. So, John, let's start there. What is going on in BC with the Musqueam Band, and what is happening with this, I guess, this new land agreement? Is that what it is? I don't know. Fill us in.
It's called a rights recognition agreement, and it does state, as you just said, that the Musqueam Indian Band, which has about 1,500 members, has Aboriginal title over Vancouver, as well as Richmond, Burnaby, New Westminster, Port Moody, West Vancouver, North Vancouver, parts of Delta, parts of Surrey, parts of Coquitlam. And this was signed in secret on February 20th, 2026. Just outrageous that an agreement of such magnitude that has such a major impact on literally 2 million, 2.5 million people living in the Lower Mainland, that it's discussed in secret behind closed doors. I've read the agreement. It says repeatedly that the Musqueam get Aboriginal title to the land, that it's their territory, that there will be a nation-to-nation negotiations, Canada and the Musqueam, as if they are two countries, that there will be a race-based Musqueam government that will exercise political authority over what's going on these Musqueam lands, alongside the federal and provincial governments, and the municipal. So we're going to have like a fourth level of federal, provincial, municipal, and Musqueam government. So another layer where these 1,500 people get to exercise authority about what's happening in Greater Vancouver. We've been assured by the Musqueam chief that don't worry, we're not going after private property. We will never charge rent. Well, the agreement says you can get it online. It was hidden for a few days. This is now on the federal government's website. It's about 13 pages in total, and the agreement says the Musqueam have Aboriginal title. The Supreme Court of Canada has interpreted Aboriginal title as meaning that it's actual ownership of the land. It's not merely some right to engage in hunting and fishing. It's land ownership. So the promise to not enforce it is legally worthless. If I'm your landlord and if we signed a lease and you've agreed you're going to pay me $2,000 a month for your apartment or commercial or whatever, I can magnanimously say, you know what, don't worry paying rent in March, don't worry paying rent in April. If I want to, I can not enforce it. However, at the end of the day, once I decide, yeah, you are paying $2,000 a month, you've signed the agreement to pay $2,000 a month. So here we've got this signed by the Chief Wayne Sparrow on behalf of the Musqueam, and some elders, and then the Honorable Rebecca Alty, which I assume is one of the federal ministers. And so it's outrageous. And it's frustrating that you have a legal agreement signed, and now they're saying, well, don't worry about it. Like it doesn't really mean what it says, and just relax. It's like, how can you relax? Like it says what it says.
So is this just another stupid Canadian platitude, symbolic gesture thing, or is it more than that?
It depends on who you believe. If you want to believe the Musqueam and the federal government, who are the two parties that have signed, these are just platitudes and, good intentions. It's like I've sent somebody an email to say, hey, it'd be great to connect over lunch sometime, but like it's not serious. It's not actually a real contract. I don't really have to follow through with it. So the federal government and the Musqueam would have you believe that this is just kind of some good intentions. But then why bother to have, dispute resolution and provisions and implementation? And it reads like a legal contract from start to finish.
And so what's the end result that they're looking for? So you're going to have 4 governing bodies over metropolitan Vancouver. I mean, the 3 that were there were ineffective and limp-wristed to begin with. So now you're adding in a 4th, and might I add, a group of people who have no clue what they're doing, whose own communities are falling apart. And I say this as a Métis person, as a man whose mother is Plains Cree Indian. Have you been to an Indian reservation lately in the Lower Mainland? Those communities are falling apart. So you're giving these people who can't even manage their own neighborhoods, rights over the entire city of Vancouver. And for our American listeners, we have a lot of people watching in the United States. We have people watching in Europe. For our American listeners, this is comparable to, say, giving San Diego and the surrounding areas symbolically back to Mexico, right? Like what does this mean? Like, what are they doing? And this is the thing that confuses me about all this, is that, sure, maybe it's a symbolic gesture and the chief gets an honorary seat at the table when municipal discussions are happening, but really doesn't have any voting or veto power. But now that you've let that idea enter the picture, now that this is in the door, they can push for more power down the road, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's they can hold off and take it easy as much as they want, but if the agreement is supposed to be taken seriously, this is what drives me crazy about it. It's like, are you serious about what you're signing and writing? And probably, many months and years and hundreds of hours, maybe thousands of hours of time went into this on the part of lawyers and consultants and federal bureaucrats and Musqueam people. Like, is this serious that you've put in a lot of time for this agreement? So the agreement is actually, it means what it says and it says what it means and it's legally binding. Or if it's a bunch of vague platitudes, why did you put this time in? Like make up your mind. But what they're doing now, it's a bit of a political game. So we have an agreement that says that the Musqueam have Aboriginal title to Vancouver, Burnaby, New West, Richmond, et cetera, to, a dozen cities and towns in that area. The Musqueam have Aboriginal title. The Musqueam, they're going to have their government is going to be an equal partner with Canada in managing Vancouver, the waterways and the rivers and the streams and I guess the roads and the bridges and everything that goes on there. They're a co-equal partner with Canada. So there's going to be, this is what the agreement says. So I find it infuriating that after this has been released, here the Musqueam chief and the federal government say, oh, it's just, it's a bunch of platitudes. It's like, relax. It doesn't really mean anything. It's like, well, then why did you bother signing it? I mean, would you ever do this in the business world? Would you spend 5 hours or 35 hours on negotiating a contract and sign the contract and then say, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of platitudes. It's kind of our expression of affection for each other and a, loose commitment to keep the negotiations open. Then why do you have an agreement that you signed that has express provisions? Anyway, I'll wait for your next question. I've got another point I want to make, but
John, please go make your point, please.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. I resent and completely disagree with the whole notion that we should have different legal rights depending on our race or ethnicity or ancestry.
Agreed.
Now, you've got 95% of Canadians, roughly, the Chinese, Japanese, East Indian, South Asian, French, British, 95% of Canadians have ancestors who came here only in the last 500 years. And then you got roughly 5% of Canadians who are Aboriginal, whose ancestors came here more than 500 years ago. And the question I have is, why should anybody have different legal rights because their ancestors arrived in this land earlier or later? The only way, in my view, for a country that has multiple ethnic groups, as Canada does, and there are many other countries in the world, probably most countries in the world, you have multiple different ethnic groups. The only way you can get along is if you say equal rights for all, special privileges for none, we're all equal before the law. The moment you start to say to one group, well, because of your ancestry, you get, special hunting and fishing rights, you get special this, you get special that, you get to have a race-based Aboriginal government to participate in running Vancouver alongside whatever, and you've got this land ownership, even though other people, there's 2 million people living there who are paying off mortgages. It's a recipe for disaster. So I just have a problem with that whole concept to begin with, that we should have different legal rights based on our race. A friend of mine is 132nd Aboriginal or 164th or 128th. I don't know. His son got an extra $5,000 when his son went to university. Mm-hmm. My son, who has no Aboriginal blood, didn't get the $5,000. I'm really happy for my friend, honestly, and for his son. I'm glad they got an extra $5,000. However, I also resent it as a taxpayer. Why should his kid get $5,000 and my kid not get $5,000 based on their race? It's racist.
Well, this is the problem. This is what happens when you create a victim class, right? You create a victim class and you are in a position where you forever have to pay reparations to that victim class. And that if that victim class is more than happy to accept their victim status, then when you introduce something like equity into the picture, you are going to create an unequal society, right? And that's first and foremost. You can't have victim classes, right? What we should be focused on is equality. Everybody starts at point A. Everybody gets the same spot at the starting line and go, right? And may the best man win, right? We live in a meritocracy. The best people who do the best work, who make the best things, enjoy the best lifestyle, right? So that's number one. But the other issue here, well, there's so many, but okay. Number one, talking to Sam Cooper, I mean, now he and I have 40 plus hours of conversations together online. And something that he has frequently brought up in our conversations is the fact that China is using Indian sovereignty as a backdoor into Canada. And that China has been courting Indian bands as a way of gaining access to resources, law enforcement and other things, right? A lot of the fentanyl super labs or methamphetamine labs that are now being discovered in Canada are being discovered where? On Indian reservations, right? And so what concerns me is that now you've added in the Musquem Band into this mix of bureaucracy, one that never seems to stop growing, right? The bureaucracy just grows and grows and grows forever. It never stops. Now you've added more bloat. And not only that, but you've added in a group of people. See, this is my thing. If the Musqueam Band or any Indian band for that matter are considered sovereign, then what do they have to do with any provincial, federal, or municipal governments in the country? You're a sovereign nation. We may as well just elect a Polish delegation to start running Toronto. Because it's the same thing. What do you people want? Do you want sovereignty? Then go. Be sovereign. Be your own country. We're not going to pay you another dollar. We're not helping you anymore. But no, you don't want to be sovereign because when it benefits you, now you're Canadian. And now you get to hold title over all these 2 million plus people. And by the way, I'll tell you this. I'm from Vancouver. I left because of where it was going, because of the shithole that it's become. But if I was still there right now, I don't know how people in Vancouver aren't tearing that place apart just out of pure disgust for what's going on there. Like, as a homeowner, what now you have this sovereign Indian band. Are they sovereign? I don't know. But do you have this Indian band now that is going to make decisions over property you own?
Or just collect a tax? Because I think practically, right, I'm not sure how interested, and I do not speak on behalf of the Musqueam or anybody else, but I don't know how interested they are in trying to, micromanage municipal bylaws and tell you, that you have to get the government's permission to put a new coat of paint on your garage or, whatever. But from a tax and money standpoint, they could levy a very relatively small tax. But when you've got, 2 million people that are each paying a small amount of money, $5 a month, $60 a year times, a million homes. I mean, you do the math. That money is going to go to 1,500 Musqueam, unless, and this makes it interesting and more complicated, the same area of Vancouver, Richmond, Delta, West Van, Coquitlam, et cetera. This same area is also claimed by the Tsawwassen Aboriginals and is claimed by the Cowichan Aboriginals, who recently, 6 months ago, got a court ruling that they own part of Richmond and its Aboriginal title, and all the home values have plummeted and people can't get their mortgages renewed, and it's turned into a whole mess. And the Squamish. So you got the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Cowichan, and the Tsawwassen are all claiming parts of this area. You've got these overlapping claims. And, I would be the first one as a freedom advocate. I advocate for the right of everybody to celebrate your culture, cherish your heritage, learn whatever languages you want to learn, including Aboriginal languages, teach languages to your children. If you want to teach the Squamish, Cowichan, Tsawwassen, Musqueam languages, Cree, Algonquin, Iroquois, whatever, Greek, Polish, French, English, celebrate your culture, learn about your heritage, be proud of your heritage. I think every culture's got some valuable things. Every culture is a mixture of good and evil, but every culture's got really precious, admirable things that are worth learning about and studying. So I support the right of Aboriginals as well as people of every ethnicity to learn about your culture, celebrate your heritage, teach your language to your kids, et cetera, et cetera. That's all part of being a free country, a free society. But where it just gets sick and twisted and a source of conflict and division is where you say, well, because of your ancestry, you get different rights. You get to hunt for deer from September to December. I only get to hunt deer for 2 weeks in October. And, your kid gets an extra 5,000 when he goes to university. My kid doesn't. You get to be a part of this extra layer of let's say Métis government that's going to co-govern Alberta alongside the provincial government. So you get to be a part of that and get your benefits and extra taxes if this layer of Métis government in Alberta, I'm making this up, gets to collect taxes. And it's just, and now we've got, like, you and I are divided because of different race, whereas really we could be unified if we see each other as, so we're created in the image of God. So we are precious. We have infinite value. That's a starting point. If we have that as a starting point, that we are created in the image of God, we're precious and valuable, then you can say, okay, well, we got different skin colors. Yes, that's a reality, but it doesn't matter. We've got a different cultural heritage. That's true, but it doesn't really matter. And we can actually get along if we have equal rights for all, special privileges for none. But the moment you mix race and law and you say that you have race-based rights, which is exactly what this Musqueam Agreement does, is it's race-based law, race-based property ownership, race-based additional layer of Aboriginal government.
Well, this is the toxic sludge at the bottom of identity politics. This is the bottom, right? And listen, I'm beside myself with this because, number one, like, I have refused Indian status for most of my life because I didn't want to be on another list. I didn't need the government in my business, nor did I want any handouts, because I don't want to be part of a victim class, right? And the problem with this, the unforeseen consequence, is something we're already seeing starting to grow in Canada. We're seeing it in the United States with the fracturing of the MAGA right. And now you're seeing this with groups, I'm not even going to name them on this podcast, but you have groups that are emerging in Canada that are ethno-nationalists. They are the other side of the coin. And they have a rightful grievance. They're upset because these things are happening. And what we're doing when we hand over Metro Vancouver to an Indian band, we are giving all of the ammunition to the ethno-nationalists. And we are encouraging people who consider themselves Canadian, just so happen to be white, to join the ranks of those ethno-nationalists, because now they are on the verge of losing their homes or losing their property that they rightfully own. So we are creating an ethno-nationalist problem. And I just don't understand how Canadians don't see this, how it seems to me like most of the world, or at least the rational world, is moving on from woke, right? Like you see in Germany, the tethers are coming off of the AfD finally, right? Because the people recognize these aren't far-right extremists or neo-Nazis. They're just people who want to preserve Germany for Germans, which I don't know. I don't see what's wrong with that. And trust me, guys, I've read hundreds of books on the Nazi German movement. Trust me when I tell you the AfD are not the Nazis. Okay? But it seems like Canada, Britain, France, we're still in this fog of woke and we can't get out, and we're just self-destructing. You know, and I look at all this like this thing, and here's the thing. Canadians are going to look at this issue as like, well, that's Vancouver, it's BC, they're socialists, they're run by the far left, NDP, whatever, fuck them, let them fall apart. But this is a nationwide problem, because now we've created a precedent in British Columbia, and that idea is going to travel. Would you agree, John?
Yes. Now, there is an important distinction in that all of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, parts of Ontario, there were treaties that were signed and the Aboriginals expressly recognize the sovereignty of the Crown. So in Alberta, for example, you have certain areas like the Siksika Reserve is close to Calgary. So you have reserves, okay, where you say like these are, and they're less than 1% of the landmass of Alberta. Okay, so we're not talking huge amounts of land, but you have reserves. You say, well, this reserve belongs to this Indian band or Indian tribe. I don't really have a problem with that. That's part of the treaty. So that, the Siksika, that territory will always belong to the Siksika. Okay, fine. But other than that, there isn't the Aboriginals recognize. I read Treaty 8 a long time ago because there was a court ruling, which was the federal court trial division said that the Treaty 8 Indians did not have to pay any tax at all. So it was like taxpayer apartheid. If you belong to the right race, you can be totally tax-free. Yeah. And the Federal Court of Appeal overturned that. And I was working for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation at the time. And I read Treaty 8 and the surrounding documents. And it's pretty clear what the vision was. It said that everybody submits to the authority of the Great White Mother, who was Queen Victoria, and says the red man shall not molest the white man. The white man shall not molest the red man. If you kill, assault, whatever, if you molest another man, you will be punished. The Great White Mother, everybody submits to the authority of the Great White Mother, and there's laws that apply to everybody, the white man and the red man. So that was the vision of Treaty 8. Not that we have this perpetual. Again, I support the right of all ethnic groups to cherish and preserve their culture and to teach their traditions to their children, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't want to have race-based legal distinctions where because of my skin color, ancestry, I've got different legal rights from somebody else of a different ancestry and different skin color. So in BC, the precedent is not direct because it would be very hard for any Aboriginal group in Alberta to make the same assertions. What the Musqueam have said, it's the unceded, they're very, Clause M, Musqueam's Aboriginal title has not been extinguished. And it repeats that over and over. This is Musqueam land. This is our territory. So they say in BC, the argument is no treaty was signed. Therefore, the Aboriginals still own British Columbia, and I wouldn't even say white people. Most people in Vancouver are of Asian descent, right?
Yeah.
Chinese, East Indian, South Asian, whatever. But the Aboriginals in BC say we didn't sign any treaties. Therefore, all of these Chinese, East Indian, European, African, Latin American people, they're not really legally, lawfully here. Not really. They kind of are, but not really. So in Alberta, it would be very hard for Aboriginals to make that same argument because they clearly signed treaties by which the Aboriginals acknowledged the authority and the sovereignty of Queen Victoria, which in a monarchy, that effectively means the Legislative Assembly of Alberta and the Parliament of Canada. So, but it's still a problem, this rotten thinking that we can correct past injustices by inflicting new injustices on people today. That rotten thinking exists in Alberta as well.
Well, it's the inverse of Jim Crow era laws, right? And it's the inverse of that. Now what we're doing is we're declaring victim classes, okay? And for people watching this who may feel like what I'm saying is insensitive, I come from a single Plains Cree Indian mother who raised myself and my brother on, like, I don't even know what the equivalent would be today, but at the time was like $8 an hour working as a secretary at a car dealership. Okay. You know what I mean? Like, if anybody has any right to claim victim status, it was me. But I was raised by a woman who would never, ever allow me to be a victim. And any time that I did feel sorry for myself or begin to perceive myself as a victim, she ripped that shit out of me. And I'm not saying I'm any better than anybody else, What I'm saying is I understand the mentality that drives this sort of thing. But what we've done is we've created these victim classes for people who want to be victims because they see the benefit in being a victim. And this thing is just, we've let the cat out of the bag, and now it's destroying everything. And yeah, maybe Alberta is safe, but what about Manitoba? What about Saskatchewan? What about Ontario? I wouldn't even go as far as to say Quebec, because they would never let that happen. For as wacky as they are, they would never let this happen. What about Nova Scotia? What about Prince Edward Island? Right? Like it just goes on and on and on forever. What about?
There's been fisheries problems in Atlantic Canada because, and in British Columbia as well. In 1992, former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney instituted what was called the Aboriginal Fishing Strategy. And he did a lot of damage that's persisted to this day. So this is 1992. Let's go figure 02 to like 34 years now. We've had race-based commercial fisheries in British Columbia. The way that it was before 1992 is that the commercial fishery was open to everybody. 25% of the commercial fishermen were Aboriginals. And it wasn't because of some affirmative action program. It was that's just the way the chips fell. Maybe Aboriginals are more interested in fishing than non-Aboriginals. Maybe this, maybe that. I'm sure anthropologists and sociologists have got, interesting research as to why it was. But there's no affirmative action. It's a race-free, it's a commercial fishery that is open to all people of all races. Right? Historically, the Japanese were very dominant at one point, and they got forced out by the federal government in the 1920s, had a deliberate policy of getting Asians out of the Aboriginal fisheries, and the Supreme Court eventually overruled that policy. Anyway, too much information. Sorry. So what happened in 1992? So we have this commercial fishery. You also have this other thing under Section 35 of the Constitution, which is the Aboriginal food fishery, which is that if you were Aboriginal, you could harvest a small amount of fish to feed your family, but you couldn't sell it. If you want to sell fish, you got to be in the commercial fishery. Okay. But if you're Aboriginal, you can fish and get a small quantity for yourself and your family as a treaty right. That was it. So Mulroney brings in the Aboriginal fishing strategy to give race-based fishing commercial fishing licenses to certain Aboriginal groups. And a lot of Aboriginals were opposed to that. This is in an industry where the Aboriginals are thriving. They are 25% of the commercial fishery is Aboriginal people compared to 7 or 10% of the BC population. So they're actually very successful. They don't need government help to thrive in the fisheries. Anyway, division. And then the same thing in New Brunswick, where the Mi'kmaq get to go out and fish for lobster ahead of everybody else first, because of some traditional ancestry, this or that. And it's like, look, it's the year 2026. We can't have race-based laws. They're toxic.
Yeah, well, my brother is a status Indian. We're full-blooded brothers. He just got his, and I didn't bother. And he is a commercial fisherman, and we have talked many times about the benefits that the Indian bands receive, which are just way lopsided in favor of the Indian bands. And look, the thing is again, like, we can keep playing this game, but what you're doing is you're giving more ground to, I will say the word again, ethno-nationalists. And for people who don't know what an ethno-nationalist is, the Nazis were ethno-nationalists. And we're see, the thing, John, that is really bothering me about this country and about what I'm seeing happening in the United States is that we, in all of our stupidity in the last 10, 15 years, running around calling each other Nazis, we're creating the Nazis now. Yeah. We're making the Nazis. The thing that we accused, and when I say we, I mean as a society. I never did it, John. I know you didn't do it, but the thing that our society accused people who were rooted in reality and were concerned about what DEI was doing to our countries, the things that they were accused of being are now actually coming to be, because we have pushed way too far, way beyond the threshold. And now you have groups that are rising up, or commentators, people like Nick Fuentes and so on and so forth, who are actual ethno-nationalists. Now, do I think Nick Fuentes is a Nazi? Not necessarily, but what comes out of that is Nazism. That's what grows out of that sentiment. And they're not wrong for being angry. They're not wrong. But the problem is it's just that it's reactionary, right? It's a reaction to everything that we're seeing happen. And it's like it's almost like they want to create this. Like they're trying to create this group.
Well, it's a predictable consequence. If you fixate on skin color, right? Because that's, I think, the fork in the road is really, are we all, do we celebrate a common humanity because we're created in the image of God, or and I know there's atheists and agnostics that believe in human rights, that, it's not that you have to believe in God per se, but just the idea that we have this common humanity, okay, whether it's belief in we're created in the image of God or something else, we can focus on that and then say, look, our skin color, yes, it's a reality. There's different skin colors, and there's different shapes of eyes, and there's different faces, and there's all these different whatever, like those are realities, but they don't really matter because we are all human. Focus on the humanity. Now, if you do the opposite and you focus on race, ancestry, ethnicity, descent, that does lead to division, and you get a backlash. So if the government is openly on a daily basis, they're always, everything's like, oh, what's the impact on the BIPOC, the was it Black, Indigenous, people of color?
Yeah.
And if you hear that talked about, like, I just get annoyed. I don't become an ethno-nationalist, but I can understand how people get really fed up with this. And then when you hear about, situations where somebody didn't get the job because they were white, and there was, or a guy didn't get the job because he's a guy, and they have an affirmative action program and they're committed to hiring women. So they hired somebody who's less qualified, who's a woman. Well, the guy's going to be upset. Or if a white guy doesn't get a job because the government says, hey, we're focused on, we want to hire women and gay people and dark-skinned people and Aboriginals, and that's our priority. That's who we're going to hire. Well, do you really think there's not going to be some kind of a backlash? And so now you do get some groups. I hear about it. I'm not familiar with it, but you get this kind of like, oh, like white Canadians, European Canadians have to look after themselves. I can't stand that sentiment, but I can see where it's coming from. When you push this garbage like this Musqueam agreement, the part of the consequence is you're going to get this white nationalism is going to arise. And I disagree with the white nationalism, but I'm saying I can see how this kind of stuff pushes us towards that conflict. And the government propaganda and the, that like you're kind of a bad person. If you've got if your skin color is too light, you kind of should be ashamed of yourself a little bit, and you should feel guilty about that. And you should be willing to pay money to people who have a darker skin. And that's a message that's being pushed on a daily basis by governments, by courts, by human rights commissions. Yeah.
And there's an additional component to it, right? Because we're also just going to open up our borders and allow people from all of these other countries with cultures that conflict with our own to just come here. And we're not going to expect integration. We're not going to expect cultural assimilation in any way. In fact, what we're going to do is we are going to reinforce their cultural principles and values and laws, many of which are asymmetrical to our own. And then what we are going to do is we are going to tell the people who have lived here for generations, be it black, white, red, yellow, brown, that the culture you're part of has oppressed this culture historically for generations, and now it's their turn. And I don't see how anybody how anybody could see it any way other than a complete and total self-immolation. And
Do you think the Americans are doing a better job on handling this issue? Because I think they've got the same issue south of the border, where you've got this, from time to time, you hear the slavery reparations thing that the taxpayers have to pay black people money because the ancestors of the black people were slaves. And you have, affirmative action, quotas, which they're fighting against. And I think the Supreme Court of the U.S. has shifted slowly with some of the decisions saying that, like, no, it has to be merit-based. But do you think they're doing a better job down there of dealing with these issues?
Well, I'll tell you this. I lived in the United States for a long time, and here's my takeaway. Most of the Black and Latino communities, at least in California where I was, the people that I encountered, they all just want to work hard and build their own little bit of wealth, right? Like, they believe in the American dream as much as anybody else. Maybe not in the same version of it. Maybe they have a bone to pick with what America has been or was and still is to an extent, because racism is definitely, it's alive everywhere. No matter where you go, there's going to be racism. But as a Latino or a Black person in the United States, you do encounter it. So maybe they have a little bit of resentment in a way, but most of them aren't walking down the street holding Black Lives Matter banners and, throwing rocks and stones at ICE officers. The crazy part about it is this. In my experience, both in Canada and the United States, do you know who the people that are most angry about all this stuff are? The immigrants. You know why? Because the people who are here legally had to jump through fucking hoops to be here. They're more Canadian and American than any of us. They weren't born here. They weren't bestowed these rights at birth. They had to earn them. And now what they're doing is they're watching people walk in and take everything without having earned anything. So they're more angry than anyone else. And that's the feedback I get routinely, both in Canada and the United States. It's the immigrants who are most angry about this. In the United States, it's the Latin American immigrants who want ICE to go further. They want ICE to get all of them out. You know why? Because they spent years dreaming about being an American. Imagine that, man. Coming from a place where you have no opportunity, none. You are below zero. And somehow, through the grace of God, you make it into the land of promise. That's the United States of America. You are provided a pathway. You go through all the paperwork. You pay the thousands of dollars. You pay the lawyer fees. You do all this stuff. You stay out of trouble. You go to school. You get an education. You work hard. Some of them 12, 18 hours a day. And then years later, once you finally get that card that tells you that you are now an American citizen, you belong to this thing, you watch people come up through the Darien Gap and up through Mexico into your country and get the same rights that you worked so goddamn hard for. Like that, those are the people that have been totally forgotten through all of this. Is that there are people John, just let me finish. There are people lined up around the world to get here, Canada and the United States. And what we've done is we've created a system where people who don't want to play by the rules can leapfrog past them and get to stay. So the point is with all of this stuff going on in the United States with the deportations, I don't agree with how a lot of it is done. But I do understand that it needs to happen because there are people who have fought tooth and nail to be here. And we should respect that.
There's a lot of Hispanics that voted for Trump and they want the wall built and they want immigration to be legal and not just anybody walking in, which strangely, and I agree with you, by the way, I'm a student of history. I've in my book, Corrupted by Fear, I've got the first 3 chapters are on the collapse of democracy in Germany in the 1920s, early 30s, and how the National Socialists took over and the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, or Alternative for Germany. Anybody who reads that platform and has listened to their politicians speak, anybody who knows what they're talking about knows that they are conservatives or classical liberals, and they're further removed from the National Socialists than other parties in Germany. They're the polar opposite. So it's just a lot of cheap shot name calling that we see there. But there's this ridiculous notion that for a country to assert its own borders somehow is far right, racist, Nazi, this, that, and the other thing. And it's ridiculous because it's analogous to your own home. You allow some people, your friends coming over, and so you open the door, you let them in, right? But it's your house. So you can let somebody in, or you can also ask somebody to leave. When you're away, you probably lock your doors. I don't know about the city where you live, but most Canadians in most cities, you lock your doors when you're out. If you come back to your house and there's somebody sitting in your living room that's there without your permission, you get very upset. You get very angry. You probably ask them to leave. You might call the police if they don't leave. So that's your house. If anybody can legally walk into your house and you have no say over it, you don't have a house. You don't own the house. You don't have property rights. If you can't exclude somebody from your own home by saying, this is my house, I get to decide who comes in and who does not come in. And a country is exactly the same way. A country that does not control its own borders is a joke. It's not a country. If anybody can walk into Germany and just set up camp and live there and work there without needing the permission of the German government, then Germany is a joke. It's not a country. And I'm using Germany as just one example, but it could be any country. If a country does not enforce patrol its own borders, control its own borders, and restrict access only to those people who have permission to come in. If a country doesn't do that, it's a joke. You're not really a country if anybody can just walk into your territory and start living there and working there without your permission. So, and now that's been called like far right and extremist and racist. Like, that's ridiculous. That's just common sense. It's not far right or racist or Nazi to put locks on the doors of your house and say that the only people allowed in are people that I grant permission to come in. It's not evil. And it's the same thing for a country.
Well, and I mean, to make matters worse, now you come home to your house and the Musquem Band owns your garage and your basement. Right?
Or the land, or they say we own everything and we want, $100 a year or $1,000 a year in because we own the land. So that's the rent. And so the promises the Musqueam are making to not collect taxes those promises are absolutely worthless, because the agreement says that the Musqueam, it doesn't say specifically how much or what the mechanism would be or whether it's skimming off of the top of municipal taxes. There's a lot of details that are not in here, but in principle, the Musqueam can collect tax from everybody in the greater Vancouver area. And it'll be interesting to see if the Tsawwassen, the Cowichan, and the Squamish, if they go to court and get a court order to set aside this Musqueam agreement. We'll have to wait and see.
I mean, what would be hilarious to me is if this sparks like a new Indian war, and once again the British and the Europeans have to step in and solve the problem. I mean, it would just be...
It was the British who ended the slave trade in British Columbia. The Aboriginals there. And I'm not picking on them. This is a common part of humanity. Every continent, every period in history, every country, slavery has been part of the human condition. So I'm not singling out the Aboriginals as being more oriented towards slavery than other groups. But there was slavery in British Columbia. This is very common in British Columbia. One tribe would raid another. They'd capture 1 or 2 or 5 people or whatever and take them. And if you were captured, then you'd be a slave until such time as you died, or maybe you escaped and got away. And the British, who came in there in the mid 1800s, as the British gradually established more control and authority over British Columbia, they forcibly put an end to the Aboriginal slave trade that the Aboriginals have been practicing against each other since time immemorial, if I want to use a cliche.
Well, John, that doesn't fit the narrative that all these platitudes have been established to support. So nobody's going to believe you anyways, even though you could probably just hop on the internet and learn about it in 10 minutes. I was fiery this episode, guys. And the reason I am is because it drives me insane to see this stuff happen. And, again, going back to this whole accusing everyone of being Hitler thing, the Nazi Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party was created as a way of protecting the workers. And do you know why? Because in the aftermath of the First World War and the abdication of the Kaiser and the introduction of democracy into Germany, the entire place was in chaos. And what we represent culturally is the same place that Germany was during the Weimar Republic. We are in total chaos. We are in a complete tailspin. Hitler emerged out of that chaos because people were desperate. And what's happening in Canada is people are getting to a point where they are starting to get desperate. And we are seeing this rise in white nationalism in this country amongst certain groups because people are fucking desperate. And it's only going to get worse if we don't stop this foolishness. So, John, I got to let you go in about 10 minutes or so because I know you got other more important things to do than to sit here and listen to me rant for an hour. I want to pivot really quickly because there is another important series of issues on the docket. Bill C8, C9, C12, and C2, C5, all of the ones in between. Where are we at with these censorship bills? I was reading today, and it seems like C9 is going through it's currently
going to be voted on Thursday, the 12th of March, Friday, the 13th of March. So coming up very soon, there's going to be a vote on C9. As things stand, the Liberals have made a deal with the Bloc. So between the Liberals and the Bloc, they've got the majority to pass it through the House of Commons. The impact will be to remove protection from good faith. Well, there's a number of impacts, but the biggest one is that currently, if you are a Catholic priest, Orthodox rabbi, a conservative evangelical pastor, and if you teach what your sacred scriptures say about homosexuality, there's an exemption there that you cannot be prosecuted for hate speech if you teach bluntly whatever your scriptures say about homosexuality. So Bill C9 is going to remove that, and it's going to open the door to people getting prosecuted for teaching and preaching what their scriptures say about homosexuality and transgenderism and whatever else. So that's a bad aspect to it. There's also the creation of a new standalone hate crime, which is pretty vague because hate is an emotion, and it's hate, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder, right? You and I could both watch the same YouTube video, and you could say it's hateful, and I could say it's not hateful, but So what I would encourage people to do is contact your member of parliament, and I don't care if he or she's Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Bloc, Green. Contact your member of parliament and say, vote against Bill C9, or I will vote against you in the next election, or so that's there's a chance that the government could get cold feet if they really get flooded with a lot of phone calls and emails in the next few days.
Here's what spooks me about this. It looks like Canada is going in the same direction as Britain. And Britain, I don't know the current numbers, but the last time I checked, I think it's 12,000 people they've put in prison for social media posts and expressing their point of view online. Points of view that, look, here's the thing. I'm a free speech absolutist. You should be able to say whatever you want, right? And that we should be able to combat bad speech with good speech. And the only way to figure out who the assholes are is you have to let them talk. So let the assholes talk, let the bad ideas out of the bottle, and then people like you and I go out there and present the alternative, the right way to, or at least the right ideas. what's happening in Britain is people who express a point of view that contradicts the cultural Marxist parasite that has grabbed a hold of Britain and infected it. They're actively being put in prison. What Bill C9, what all these bills look like to me is a gateway to that, is a gateway to you and I having a conversation like this, me ranting for an hour and saying some of the things that I said, which would ultimately be perceived by the DEI prophets or disciples as being racist, and me ending up in prison. That's where it seems like this is going, that they're not necessarily trying to police the internet in terms of having the right to turn people on and off, which they ultimately will. But for now, what they're trying to do is police the speech specifically so that they could whitewash all of the people who don't have the will and the temerity to say what's really on their mind, and then get rid of people like me and you. And that seems like what is going on here, right?
Well, that's a trend. I still, call me naive if you want, but I continue to believe what Edmund Burke said, that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. There have been an awful lot. There are a lot of good Canadians who love truth. They love justice. They love freedom. And they have been too naive and too trusting in the last 30, 40, 50 years, and assuming incorrectly that, the people we elect federally, provincially, municipally, I might disagree with them about this or that, but they're good people like me, and they respect freedom. They respect our Canadian heritage. So there's been this naivete and this assumption that, the people that we elect are, I might disagree with them a little bit, but they're not going to be really evil. They're not going to be really bad. They're not going to trample our freedom of speech into the ground. They're not going to create race-based laws. They're not going to destroy the property rights of millions of people in Vancouver. They're not going to unleash human rights prosecutions against Canadian, like Barry Neufeld in British Columbia gets ordered to pay $750,000 to some gay teachers in Chilliwack who felt offended because he said that we should protect children from transgender ideology. Shame on Barry Neufeld. I mean, $750,000 has been ordered to pay. So there's been a lot of naivete in the past where we just assume that other people are good like us, and they love truth, they love justice, they care about freedom, they understand what our free country is about. They're not going to undermine our freedoms of religion and conscience, expression, association, peaceful assembly. So because of that naivete, good people have withdrawn from the democratic process. What I see changing, there are more Canadians today who are awake and alert and aware than 6 years ago when lockdowns were brought in March of 2020. We're coming up to the 6-year anniversary. There's more Canadians who are awake today. And so if people who love truth, justice, and freedom are actively engaged in politics, federally, provincially, municipally, school board, then we don't have to slide further into this dark pit, this totalitarian hell, this tyranny where we all become slaves of this state surveillance and so on and so forth. That's the direction we're heading. We don't have to go there, but it's up to people to take action.
That was such a beautiful, I had like 50 more questions to ask, but that was such a beautiful statement that I might just want to leave it there. I couldn't agree with you more. Look, the reality is this, guys. Being Canadian or American, it's not about being white. It's not about being middle class. It's not about being blonde-haired, blue eyes. What made these countries of ours so magical and such a heaven for people from other places, such a desirable place to be, is because of these principles that we believed in, the foundation that our nations were built on. That's what made people want to come here and be part of this. And it's what made our countries what they are or what they were. And we're losing that because we've taken our focus off of the central action that we all followed. And look, the truth is that both Canada and the United States were built out of Judeo-Christian ethic. Mm-hmm. And whether or not you identify as a Christian, it doesn't matter, because that was the foundation on which everything was built. And look at what we built.
The supremacy of God. It's in the preamble of the Charter. Whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And part of the rule of law is the opposite of this neo-Marxist, fixation on race and skin color. The rule of law means we're all equal before the law, regardless of race, ancestry, skin color.
Yeah. And so, John, bills C2, C8, and C12, they all look like they've been tabled for now, like they've stalled somewhere in our House of Commons. Is that correct, or are those still kind of bubbling?
C2, the Strong Borders Act, which should be called the Strong Surveillance Act, it's been put on the back burner. And the reason is because the government got so much backlash. So many Canadians from all walks of life, all across the country, contacted their member of parliament and said, Bill C2, you've got obligations on software companies to provide subscriber information to government. You've got new search powers for government officials. You've got the criminalization of the use of cash in amounts of 10,000 or more. Canada Post has the right to open mail without a warrant, on and on and on. It was so bad. It's on the back burner now. That goes to show what can happen when Canadians speak out and contact their MPs. The other dangerous one after C9, which C9 will be, rejected or accepted pretty soon. Then we got C8, which is cybersecurity, which includes provisions to have the federal cabinet ministers kick Canadians off the internet without notice, without due process, without warning. Suddenly, you find yourself, because they've ordered your internet service provider to cut off access. So you find yourself, you can't use your phone, you can't use your computer, you can't do your banking. And so that's a serious problem with Bill C8, which is going to be voted on at some point in the next few weeks or months.
John, man, I'm so glad you do what you do. You're a very competent guy. Dude, you could be out there representing, car accident victims and making yourself a couple $1 million a year just bilking the insurance companies sort of deal, but you're here, fighting for this country. And, I'm sorry, everybody, that this episode points I ranted. I'm just very passionate about this because I see what we're losing. And it frustrates me that Canadians don't see it, and that Americans have a much clearer view, but there's even a lot of Americans who don't see it. And the thing is we look at the rest of the world and we look at events throughout history, like, Nazi Germany or communist China, which still exists today, or the Soviet Union, as being, oh, that happens over there, that doesn't happen here. But the thing is during that time when those movements were growing, when Mao Zedong and Adolf Hitler were coming to power, the people in those places had that same attitude. This can't happen here. It just can't happen here. This place is too free. It's too difficult. Like how would they do it? Well, they did it. And the thing about Canada is that we're in the same position right now. We are in the same place where, even worse, because Canadian apathy is a disease unto itself. But we're in this place where, people are walking around like, oh man, John Carpay is just crazy. He just goes on the internet and says things. Oh, Jason James, that's that guy on X with that podcast, that writer who spins up these crazy conspiracy theories, to make a couple bucks. But no, that's not what we're doing, guys. It's just that people like me and John, and probably you listening, we're just a little bit ahead of the curve, and we see where we're going because we've done the reading. And that's why we're doing this, because we feel an obligation to you and to the countries that we are citizens of. And John, my brother, I can't say how much I appreciate you and appreciate the wealth of knowledge that you have. I appreciate you sitting there quietly while I ranted and raved on this podcast episode today. I normally don't get this passionate, but it's just the ridiculousness, just how ludicrous it is to hand over Metro Vancouver to the Musqueam Indian Band. I just like it's baffling. It's mind-boggling.
It's over the top. No, it is. It's hard. Like you almost want to not deal with it because it's so astronomical. This is not just like an accounting error, or like a small mistake. Everybody's making small mistakes every day when you're driving your car. Maybe you forgot to shoulder check, or you're writing a report and you get one of your facts wrong. I mean, we're all everybody's making mistakes all the time. We're human. This is like, wow. Like, are you kidding me? You're giving the Greater Vancouver area to the Musqueam with the right to tax and to co-govern the place alongside the federal and provincial governments. It's so it's hard to believe, but this is the reality. It is on the federal government website. I think it's Indigenous Crown Relations. I'm not sure what department, but if you Google the Rights Recognition Agreement, Musqueam, you can see the whole agreements online, and it's been signed. So again, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. So we just gotta stay awake and alert and aware and engaged and involved and active, and we're going to keep on fighting till we win.
Yes, and just one last thing I want to propose for the listeners out there. My biggest fear, my biggest concern about this is that this is not necessarily a backdoor for China, but a backdoor into land expropriation by our federal government, using the First Nations Indian bands as puppets, essentially as a gateway to land expropriation. We know that there are a series of farms in Ontario that have already been expropriated by the federal government, and that perhaps this is another way into that. This is another way for them to slowly, inch by inch, eliminate private property. And once we get there, again, I mean, I don't know what it's going to take.
You'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
And there it is. John,
sorry to interrupt. Yeah,
that was fucking perfect.
Private property stands in the way of your happiness. Yeah,
there it is.
And the family.
Yeah. John, before we get out of here, tell everybody where they can find you.
So, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Our website is JCCF.ca. JCCF, Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms. Sign up for our free email newsletter. We send that out once or twice a month. If you want to support us financially, we are a registered charity. This past February, we sent out close to 10,000 tax receipts to Canadians from coast to coast. So if you want to support our work to preserve freedom in Canada, you can donate online, mail in a check, whatever you like. Or just, start with sign up for our newsletter and you'll be kept up to speed on all of our court cases and projects and papers and the stuff that we're doing.
Yeah. Well, John, I very much appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you.
Made a lot of sacrifices to do this. And for everybody listening, man, I know that for the last 10, 15 years, people have pointed at me and John, people like me and John, like we're the Nazis, but we were never the Nazis. The Nazis are coming, though. The Nazis are coming, so stop being apathetic and get busy. John, it's always great talking to you, man. Thank you.
Have a great rest of the night. Take care.